Yes, I know. This review is a bit late. Originally, the plan was to stick to at least one Sword Art Online game per year. Mainly because when it comes to a Sword Art Online game, you never really know what you will find. Sometimes it's alright, and most of the time, it's not. Worse, it's usually painful as the game promises a lot of potential and not even a sliver of it is used. And experiencing that is mentally taxing, because I just want a good Sword Art Online game, that's all. I don't want my hopes and dreams to be shattered again and again. But yeah, unfortunately, that is something we probably will not get, or at least not as good as it could be. And we, the players and diehard fans, have to grind our souls away on it every single time and see our hopes and dreams be shattered again and again. But there is always a chance, that is the worst part. There's always a small little chance that the game might be decent. And if that's so, then it's an absolute win. So, will it be the case here? Will Reki Kawahara finally have mercy on our souls? Well, that's the question, of course. To be fair, of all the Sword Art Online games, this one, despite being one of the last to be reviewed, has been high on my list in terms of fan interest. Mainly because it promises a crossover with Accel World. Another creation of Reki Kawahara, and just like Sword Art Online, has a great idea at its core, cool world design around it, and speaking of design, the characters themselves look amazing. But unlike Sword Art Online, Accel World didn't break into the mainstream and was left forgotten. It did not get multiple animes, movies, and most importantly, games. So yeah, as a fan of Accel World, it's really safe to say that I'm really clinching on to this game being good. Because I really love the ideas packed in that world, and I want a game that involves that. Realistically, this is probably the best and only shot we will have in getting a game with Accel World involved. Which, damn, what a grim, dark outlook that is. Being depending on Sword Art Online games for other animes to have a game. Yeah. But in any case, let's find out what Accel World versus Sword Art Online has to offer. Accel World vs Sword Art Online seems to take place right after the events of Sword Art Online Lost Song. Kirito, Asuna and their child, Yui, are spending some nice time together in a VR MMORPG called Alfheim Online. While having a good time, they suddenly all get a pop-up message asking all players to log out for the game's maintenance, which is already strange. But what is stranger is that Yui starts to act differently as that message came up. Kirito and Asuna decides to investigate what is going on and shadow Yui right after they fake logging out. And from that point on, shit hits the fan. Yui gets captured by an unknown person called Persona Vabel. The world of Alfheim is changing and strange looking robots called burstlinkers appeared out of nowhere, claiming they come from a totally different reality called a brain burst. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. A lot more of things seem to be happening in the background. But it's nothing that our hero, our true Chad of a gamer, Kirito, can't handle. Together with his friends, he teams up with these burst linkers to stop Persona Vabel from changing Alfheim and of course to save his daughter, Yui. Now you might think that after hearing the initial premise that this game does not sound nearly as interesting compared to other Sword Art Online games. And you would be right. We had interesting takes on VR itself, a death game in VR, AR, self-contained virtual worlds and AI to name a few. And I'll be frank, at the initial start of the game, I was a bit disappointed in what the story offered. It still is a hero story involving Kirito, and on that end the game lives up to the standards of the series itself. But it felt a lot less ambitious in terms of plot elements. I would say that this plot is more or less a rerun of the original plot that was told in the anime of Sword Art Online. But instead of Asuna being the princess in the castle, it's now Yui. And that's just very uninspiring compared to what we have seen before, making the story feel more like a side quest and completely falling short on what the standards are in this series. But hey, we got Accel World in this, a series that has its own ideas and takes on VR, AR and AI and everything in between. And those are quite in line with Sword Art Online's ideas and takes on it as well. so that could really spice things up here. But unfortunately it doesn't. The title is even a bit misleading in my opinion. It says Accel World versus Sword Art Online, but in reality it's not two different worlds clashing with each other or anything like that. It's just the Sword Art Online game with characters from another anime added on top, which is as lazy of a crossover as that sounds. But the game doubles down on it even further by not utilizing anything of Accel World, not its world building, its characters, or its ideals and takes on certain aspects. Let's say you never touched anything of Accel World. You know zero to nothing of it. Well, if that is the case, then you will be just fine in this game. The things characters of Accel World refer to are irrelevant in every aspect. Be that in the events they are mentioned in, story or world building, they are just characters from another anime from the same maker dumped onto Kirito's hero story. Which of course is just a very disappointing thing to say. Not just as a fan, but again, think of the potential. Because think about it. Having two different animes with interesting takes on VR and AR being mixed could create a very interesting story. But as always, the interesting and fun aspects a Sword Art Online game can have are hijacked by Kirito's hero story. I will say, without spoilers, that near the end the story does fly off the track. Maybe a bit in a predictable way, but it does something that lines up with what Sword Art Online always does. Yet, that's also where a problem comes in. Because compared to the other games in the series, it requires a lot more effort and work to get to that point. Again, it's not established at the start of the game, but near the end. And while the story is short, around 10 to 15 hours long, it feels a lot longer. As until that point, all you do is fly around, do quests, find your friends and fight monsters. During these quests, all I could think was what this game could have been. Because boy, what this game could have been. Not only could it have been a clash between the differences in VR and AR aspects of both series, I mean, there is versus in the title, so where is that? But imagine a story where two player bases of two different games are at war in a single game. Each game has its weaknesses and strengths, and making fighting each other a weird tactical game where both sides need to understand the other to win. The Accel World characters could have been the bridge for this, a group of characters that the player might be familiar with if they ever touch the Accel World series, but still have a reason to get to know these characters, which should be easy as they come from another yet very familiar world. And as a fan for both series, this game could have just offered awesome crossover moments where our heroes would combine their games together to fight a bigger threat. I mean, am I the only one that thinks this could have been a sick story? That this game could have had a good story? Probably, because the writer thought it was not worth a shot, or at least worth a shot on diverting from what we already know of a Sword Art Online game. Giving us instead a story that felt like a side quest. A DLC that was meant for Sword Art Online Lost Song, but got packaged and sold to us as something more. Now, fluffing an entire story or interesting aspects, it's not something new for Sword Art Online. I argued in every single review that it's more or less its most common trait. The other common trait it has is offering game-unique characters that has some story, design or background that makes at least some moments of the story interesting and worth your time. Last time we had Dorothy, in Alicization we had Medina. Fatal Bullet went all out and gave us a complete group of game-unique characters, and of course I will not forget my personal favorite, Philia from Hollow Fragment. It's however unfortunately that in this game they still haven't fixed her hair color, and what is worse is that in this game there are no unique game characters. Yes, Accel World throws a ton of characters on top of the roster, but I would not lump them into the group of characters I just named. Again, those characters had a story arc and made playing through the game worth it. But unfortunately, that is absent here, and it's truly missed. Just like the interactions themselves among characters. On that aspect, it dialed back greatly, and while the moments that we had were, well, memorable, very memorable even, there were just not a lot of them. And during these moments, I couldn't help but feel like there was a large disconnect between the two groups of characters from both series. Like there was some kind of wall between them, interacting at a distance constantly or still within their own group despite being in a larger group. It felt a bit off, just like the story, the interactions barely captured the possibilities of what could be done with this crossover. Normally, this is one, if not the strongest aspect of the series, but now interactions just bummed me out a bit. Last time the game dialed back this much on its best aspect was, well, with Lost Song. Again, establishing the idea that this was more or less meant to be a DLC for that game than anything else. And the comparisons with Lost Song doesn't stop here, cause let's talk about combat. The majority of this game's combat is very similar to Lost Song, yet improved in some good ways and some very bad ones. Its major improvement for me was the overall feeling. Fighting itself felt a bit more responsive, skills and progression were better streamlined, and upgrading characters, gear and items felt more worthwhile than before in Lost Song. However, these improvements made not a big difference and got overshadowed by the very bad things it did not seem to improve on, or even made things worse. While the combat feels more responsive, movement felt a lot less responsive and became such a pain. Getting to the enemies felt slow, almost sluggish, and that is if you could walk simply up to your enemy, because most enemies involve fighting while flying. Fighting enemies in the air just felt very unnatural and frustrating, as it was very easy to miss attacks or wrongly anticipate distances, and that is on top of the slow movement that you already had. Again, it just made a very frustrating combination. But what is worse is that the movement outside of combat doesn't improve either. The game requires you to travel a lot of distance, which is done by flying in a straight line for minutes without anything happening. But don't worry, it does offer a sprint button. But the sprint felt just as effective as the sprint in the original Mass Effect 1. All in all, fighting enemies up close was just not a lot of fun and very frustrating at times, especially if you had to do it while flying. I would describe most combat encounters as a struggle of knowing if you're close enough to attack and getting in a good position to just spam the same attacks over and over again, only to be knocked out of the sky very easily at some point, to only have to then get back to your spot and hoping to do damage again until the enemy is dead. This struggle really made me avoid close combat as much as possible, because yeah, it was just that frustrating. But the key word here is close combat, because range combat was quite fun. Especially characters like Scarlet Rain were a lot of fun, because just like in the anime, she can bring out her entire fortress, which made fights that could be annoying flying, falling grind that I just described earlier into, I guess, a mech fight, and a usually rather quick fight as well. But the fun was not limited to just one character. All ranged characters were decent fun to play with, no matter from which series they came. It more or less solved a bit of the larger problem I had with this combat system. Not only does it carry more impact, but more importantly, it doesn't require the constant move slowly to the enemy, get knocked down and get back up dance that I described earlier. Avoiding this made the combat a lot less frustrating and therefore a lot more fun. This, however, did not avoid the grindy nature of a Sword Art Online game. To progress through the story, you still, to a degree, have to grind to keep you at a certain level and have certain gear. Now, range offers a way to cheese this aspect a little bit as well. I mean, the enemy can one-shot you because their level is much higher, but they first have to reach you before it can. But when you want to do character interactions and such, you have no choice in which character to bring, meaning you can't just cheese everything with range, and sometimes you not only have to get through an annoying combat encounter, but grind certain characters to an appropriate level to actually get past that combat encounter and unlock the interaction event. So having a lot less interaction moments wasn't bad enough. Getting to the ones that are there in the game can be a frustrating endeavor as well. And I think that captures my time the most with Accel World versus Sword Art Online. It was for the larger part very frustrating, and I know, I should know better than expect a Sword Art Online game to live up to its ideas, potential, and even its established foundation. But again, I more or less keep falling for it. Against my better judgment, the hopium at the start of this game was real. The opening itself showed a glimpse of what this game could have been, maybe should have been. Sword Art Online already holds so much potential, and then you add another series with also a lot of potential, and yet we somehow are left with barely anything. That is kinda impressive, so to say, but more depressing than anything else. Whereas the other Sword Art Online games showed something interesting, had characters interaction, and in rare cases combat that made playing through the game worth your while, here in Accel World vs Sword Art Online, that is just not the case. It fell short in many of the same areas as Lost Song, and as stated before, but also mentioned to me via your comments, this game felt more like a DLC for the game rather than a game on its own. And I really struggle recommending this game, because even for diehard Sword Art Online fans, I don't see a reason to buy it, because even the fan service here is very low. And the nerve to keep asking 50 euros for a game that was released in 2017 really seals the deal for me. I sadly cannot see a rhyme or reason to really recommend this game, not even to the most diehard fan of both series. Maybe if you're on a challenge like me to play all Sword Art Online games, or really want rough games to play, then this game could be on your list, but be warned that compared to the other Sword Art Online games, this is the bottom of the barrel.